Well, Dan, for this final part, really appreciate your time today, and the hands-on is definitely my favorite part, and we'll definitely work with you more in the future for sure. But one of the things I wanted to do to take advantage of your experience, both working professionally in the field and teaching, and also working with people who work professionally in the field and have come up as students of yours to now owning their own shop. I know your friend, what is his name, Danny Cox, right? Donnie Cox. And we'll mention him in a minute. But you've helped a lot of people to be successful, and also me as well. I've learned a lot from you. One of the things I've been able to do as a result of reading the book and also practicing like we did just a few minutes ago with the Load Pro and with all the other tools is I have definitely, without question, been able to turn what I've learned doing electrical into making money. No question about it. And that's what I want to talk about to help with a lot of the viewers here, because most of my viewers are different than on most mechanic channels in that they are trying to learn this stuff and will do the time and effort required to succeed at it. But then how do they translate that into making money? So one of the things I wanted to ask you is what is some of the advice that you have for people? Can they, for example, be the highest paid person in their dealership? Is a dealership the right way to go? I wouldn't know because I don't work in the industry. And my models and methods and everything generally aren't going to be very similar to what most people's would be, but you have that experience. So can you kind of comment, how can people get rich off of this?
No pressure there. Well, I'm going to remind everybody that I started out as an aircraft mechanic. So my background involves electrical and mechanical and sheet metal and composites and hydraulics and pneumatics and paperwork and all that stuff. So I have a rather varied background, and I was mentored by a fellow named Jack Richards, who will always be 85 years old in my mind. And he said one day, he said, Danny, you got to remember the only difference between a fast mechanic and a slow mechanic is the fast mechanic knows where to start and which tools to take. All right? Now, that's relatively true. I mean, that's pretty true. And a slow mechanic can get the job done, but they're going to have to work harder getting up to speed to learn those tricks and to know which tools to take and so forth. And he was right about that. Well, electrically, that can very easily be sort of defined as your ability to interpret electricity at its most basic level, because the most advanced things out there that we deal with are still working on very fundamental concepts. The first thing I would say is, if you know the basic principles of general fundamentals, as my dad said, then everything relates to that, and everything will sort of work together, and it's never new. It's always the same stuff, just different day, same stuff, right? So having that knowledge and having those understandings of the basic principles will go a long way to making the more complicated problems less complicated. So that's the first thing. The second thing is understanding that it's about average time. It's not instantaneous time. You know, the first time, how many times do you know mechanically where the left side took you 5 hours and the right side took you 20 minutes? Because you learned during the first 5 hours how to make it a 20-minute job, right? So that's the right tool where to start. Well, electrically, it's the same thing, but people don't perceive it that way. They don't perceive a circuit as a circuit. They perceive every circuit as different when every circuit is actually the same circuit. So rather than capitalizing on the commonality of problems and the simplicity of the concepts, people tend to overcomplicate it and overthink it, and then throw into that the fear of taking too long, and I got to get it finished, and I got to get it done, and I got to get it running, and I got to get it out the door, and I don't have time to do a diagnosis, and I might get in trouble, or someone might say something, or someone might accuse me of being slow, or criticize me, or find fault with what I'm doing, and reading the schematics is confusing, and I don't know what I'm doing, so I feel embarrassed. You know, the whole gambit of all of these little emotional problems, it's like, oh, I'll just go do it. You know, well, if you just go do it without knowing how the hell it works, it's a lot more complicated, right? So in my view, A, know the basics, B, be willing to take the time to learn and pay attention as you learn, and then the right tools and where to start, theory works. But if you never go through those first 2 steps, I just don't think you're going to get there. But if you get there, opportunities are just limitless.
Yeah. Well, let's talk specifically about some things. For example, my uneducated theory on this would be, I would think I would like to work at a place that does the flat rate labor, because I'm thinking if I've got the know-how, the right tools, that I can quickly resolve issues, then I'm going to make repairs below that flat rate estimate, and I'm going to make more money. Is that an accurate thing, or is that not a way for electrical repairs? Because the thing with electrical repairs is that, unlike replacing brakes or replacing an alternator or replacing even a transmission, we know what to charge for that because you look in the book. But I can't tell you how long it's going to take to find the electrical problem on your transmission. That could be 10 hours maybe.
Yeah.
So how do we translate that into making money for the technician and or the shop?
Well, the first answer is learn from the 10-hour job so it becomes a 5-hour job, and learn from the 5-hour job so it becomes a 2-hour job. You know, I'm not a fan of flat rate. I don't dismiss it, and I know some people, swear by it and some people love it, but it goes back to the fast mechanic, slow mechanic. Well, the fast mechanic makes money on flat rate, the slow mechanic doesn't. Well, how do you get the experience to be fast if you show up and don't know anything and never make any money, if you're always a young guy or the new guy or whatever? And how do you get to that point where you're working faster and beating flat rate and making a decent living? I don't know the answer to that question, but I know that unless you have someone who will help you and have someone who will lead you through and guide you and mentor you in the shop as a young guy on flat rate, it's really doggone hard to get to the point where you're making enough money to be happy. So I don't think flat rate is wrong. For the young guy who's just starting out, it's damn difficult. And the pressure to be fast is what I've been saying all along, is what makes it hard for people to take the time to learn the things you need to do that you need to learn to be fast. So if you don't know how to read a schematic, if you don't know how to understand how to read a voltmeter, if you don't know what voltage drop is and you never learn those things, then I don't think you never really ever get there. There's so much going on in the shop. Flat rate, in my opinion, is just not conducive to learning. I would agree with that. I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
I want people to learn.
Right.
So anything that inhibits learning, I'm not in favor of, right? So I'm in favor of true apprenticeship, 7 years working under somebody who knows what they're doing to learn the trade, but we can't do that anymore. That doesn't happen. So, woulda, shoulda, coulda. But ultimately, I think a person just has to have an opportunity to continue learning, and I'm not sure flat rate is the environment that really does it as well as some others is all. So
you've also brought up a point too, that there's sort of this mentality, we touched on it earlier, where charging for the diagnostics, especially electrical, because it always turns out to be something really simple, there's this mentality that it's unethical maybe even to charge for the diagnostics. But your argument is you should absolutely charge 100%. For your time, 100% every hour that was spent.
Again, remembering that 10 hours becomes 5 hours, becomes 2 hours, and when you get good and you only charge 2 hours and there are no comebacks, you'll have more work than you can do because people will come to you, right? So we talked to Donnie on the phone, a former student, Donnie, who's in Maryland. I taught him 8 hours, and the 2 things I taught him were it's always something simple and don't change parts. Just look for the fault in the harness, and as you heard him say, he's doing great, right?
Yeah.
So, and he said very plainly, and I agree with this, that if he works 8 hours, he bills 8 hours. Because the truck that he's working on is useless to the customer until the truck is back on the road. Well, whatever it takes to get it back on the road is whatever he bills for. And anybody who just gives their time away doesn't understand basic economics. I mean, how can you make a living if you do stuff for free when you're supposed to be paid for it? I don't understand it. There is a mentality, though, and this goes back to the idea that, and this is really important, okay? There's no such thing as an electrical repair. All repairs are mechanical, and it's always something simple when you actually do the repair. It's the diagnostics that teaches you and takes time. Well, if you don't do the diagnostic, you never learn, and then you rush to the repair, and then you feel embarrassed or insulted, or your service manager says, I can't charge the guy 8 hours, all you did was tighten a screw and fix a butt splice. I can't charge for that. Why not? It took 8 hours. It's 8 hours. Well, were you going to charge 7 hours to shop time? how do you make a living doing that, right?
I would also argue that
it's pure economics.
yeah, the whoever owns that vehicle, whatever cost they have of not having the vehicle in service, and also the multitude of shops they may have spent thousands of dollars on before, is something that I'll often leverage.
I teach marinas, and these boats cost $1 million. I mean, flat out $1 million. I would never pay $1 million for one of these boats, but people do. Well, if you own $1 million boat, you can afford 10 hours of labor. And I'm going to say something very blunt. My job is not to protect the customer's bottom line.
Okay.
That is not my job description. Okay.
Yeah.
My job description is not to protect the customer's bottom line. If it takes me 8 hours, it takes me 8 hours. If your shop won't bill for 8 hours, I don't know what to tell you, but you're worth the 8 hours because that's what it took. Now, if you're smart, you learn during the 8 hours, and the next time is 6, and then it's 4, and then it's 2. But that comes down to the schematic reading the manual, understanding basic. I mean, it's all a very, very simple problem if you just take your time and do it right, in my opinion. That's an opinion, but I think that's what it takes.
Yeah. So let's look at this from a customer's perspective, because I think most people are listening to this and they're agreeing. Yeah, you know, I'm skilled. Also, I have thousands of dollars in electrical diagnostic tools, thousands of dollars. That's also an expense that I want to be compensated for and things, not to mention my thousands of hours of time learning this stuff on my own and things. So we're all on the same page. But from a customer perspective, one of the challenges is that they don't have endless amounts of money. Most of my customers definitely don't have $1 million boat. Most of my customers are barely making it week to week.
Sure.
Most of them are, and so when I tell them, I cannot give you an estimate, this could cost you $100 if I can do this in an hour, or this could cost you $1,000. If it's $1,000, that's life-changing for them, and they probably can't do it.
I get it.
So, but if I tell them, yeah, if you want me to replace your alternator, that's going to be $700. It will be $700 no matter what.
Right.
And if it takes me longer to do that, that's unfortunate for me. I'll probably do it quicker and make more money, but you will pay $700. But my inability to tell a customer, it could be more money than you can afford, just to find out what's wrong, there's got to be some better method than just, hey, you have to open your checkbook for whatever it's going to be. Would you set like a minimum for the customer? Like, hey, I'll spend, if you're comfortable spending $300, I'll spend 2 hours, and if I don't find it by then, hey, tough luck. Yeah. You see what I'm saying?
No, I get it.
And so what's your response on that?
I don't know that I have a meaningful answer, but I know how I feel about it. And you have to remember too, and this is part of the reason I think some of the folks are out there listening and watching and whatever, they're not quite aware. You know, I showed you the pictures. I mean, I work on 350-ton trucks, right? I work on dragline cranes. So I'm working in an environment where I don't have to worry about a school teacher with a Toyota. I mean, it's not really where I am, right? So I don't want to.
They have to get those running because they're losing thousands of dollars a day.
Right, and that's not really a fair comparison. And I don't think it's appropriate to try to put those two customers into the same category because they're different customers.
Well, let's talk about the latter category, because I think we all agree that somebody who has a trucking business, they have to pay whatever it is to get that big rig on the road, whatever it is.
But they also understand the problem more thoroughly than the school teacher with a Toyota. So talking to you, a truck owner who understands the complexity and has been around a little bit and has got a little bit of grease under your fingernails, that's a different conversation.
We're agreed. That's a lot easier.
So that's part of the issue.
Let's talk about the school teacher, though, because that's what most of my viewers are going to deal with. They're going to deal with the school teacher that says, well, if this is going to cost more than $500, and even then, you may come to the conclusion it's a bad computer, which is going to be $3,000, which I can't afford anyway.
Right.
Do you have it? Maybe it's out of your field or something, but how do you deal with that?
Well, I'm not going to. It is most assuredly a topic that is discussed in the classroom. It's not a topic that I deal with every day. And I think you're kind of bounding on the borders of ethics and morality on a certain level.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Because
it's a moral and ethics question.
Right, you have to judge every case individually. And I think it's fair, number one, to understand that your time has value and you should be paid for your time at a reasonable rate. And I think that if it comes to the school teacher in the Toyota who's got 4 kids and blah, 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 those are all problems we all have. then I think it comes down to an ethical decision based upon whether the person can pay you weekly or in one fell swoop, or you give them this massive discount, or you barter. I mean, I know people who barter for things. So, I just think it comes down to the contract being fair to both people. I don't have an answer, but I know that you need to be paid for your time as well as and as thoroughly as you can, and you should not be in the habit of giving it away for free when you don't have to.
Yep.
Does that answer?
Well, no, but it does open for the concept that basically you may have to be creative. Like for example, you had brought up a good idea that I actually may integrate, and I may say something, for example, because I know I can kind of cheat a little bit.
Sure.
I know when I do find that problem, it's going to be simple.
Sure.
I will charge you for the diagnostic, but I will not charge you labor for the repair.
Right.
Sounds great to a customer, and it sounds like a pretty fair balance, but I know that it's really favoring me because that repair is going to be simple, whatever it is. We know that.
Yeah, I mean, the actual physical labor to repair something like in a wire or splice the wire back together or clean the ground.
That's pretty much what it's going to be.
Reattach a switch, a terminal to a switch. I mean, we all know from experience that when let me tell you what I tell people in class. How many times have you found the actual problem after 2, 3, or 4 hours of diagnostics, and the thing is so simple, your biggest problem is writing it up without sounding like a dumbass? I asked that question, and everybody raises their hand and says, I've had that problem because it's something so simple, and I've got 4 hours into it, and then I just do something dumb and it works. How do I write that up and not sound dumb? Well, you just do. Yeah. That's what it took, right? Don't sell yourself short.
Yep.
So that's fundamentally how I teach it, because I believe that's the truth.
Yep. One of the other things that for me particularly can be different is the fact, because a lot of times these will make really good videos for my channel, I'll sometimes consider a concession to the customer for billing because I know that I'm going to get the video, which is a big interest to me. So that can sometimes be a variable, like you said, bartering and stuff like that. I will admit that for me personally, I very often take that customer's situation into account. If I've got a single mother with 3 kids that her husband just died 6 months ago and she's trying to get it together, I tend to work with her a lot more than when the guy pulls up and I almost pass out because the smell of weed in the vehicle is so strong. Yeah. I'm thinking, this guy can afford to pay me top dollar here. Yeah. So I guess it's just up to each individual, but I do agree. One of the things that I adapted is I used to do this thing where it's like, I will do the diagnosis for free because I'm going to learn something. I'm going to get an education out of this. Well, at this point, I no longer really feel that way, and it's like, well, if I got to spend 5 hours diagnosing this, that's worth more than $100 to me.
Sure.
By far. But I like to try to also set a limit with the customer where, what is your budget, and maybe I'll work with them on it. I'll spend up to this many hours trying to find it for that fee that you can afford. Right. And if I take longer than that, I'm afraid you're going to have to take it to another place that, by the way, charged you $2,000 and didn't fix it, right?
There's no possible way to soften the blow of an electrical problem. I mean, it's well understood in the industry. Everybody knows it's going to take, the problems you're discussing are problems that every service manager and every technician understands. That's why guys hate electrical for flat rate. They just hate it. I hear it all the time. Man, I hate electrical for flat rate because you never know, and and your service manager's up your butt about it. I think it just comes down to having a conscience and understanding that not everybody's in the same situation.
Yep. Sometimes you can have things reverse. I've had actually many times where people have spent thousands of dollars trying to get something diagnosed and repaired for their car. They've been to multiple shops, literally receipts that they show me, thousands of dollars, and they will just tell me, I am giving you a blank check. I want this fixed. I don't care how much it costs. If it costs $5,000, then it's $5,000. I want this fixed. I have had that many times, and I'll find the problem in 30 minutes. And I'm thinking, if I charged them $500, they would think I walk on water. They would be so thrilled with that.
Sure.
But then part of me is thinking I'm charging $1,000 an hour, which is unethical, I guess. You got any thought on that? Because usually what I do is I just kind of round it up to an hour, and they just think $100, that is incredible. I don't even know what to tell you. And they usually pay me more because they're grateful.
Well,
but what's your thought on if that happens?
I think the first
You
thought
charge
is,
them $500 and they think that you're a savior?
well, I wouldn't go that far, but no, I think it comes down to understanding basic economics. I mean, if you're the kind of person who needs to make if I can just quickly move into my family, my father was a terrible businessman, but a brilliant surgeon. And we were always short of money, and he almost went bankrupt, and he almost went broke. And it turns out, we found out that he was the chief of surgery at a hospital for 22 years and never got paid for it because he never asked.
Oh, interesting.
That was bad. Officially, not interesting, bad.
Yeah.
And that was a very important lesson to me because it made me understand that basic economics is if you want to be a surgeon helping people, you have to be in business. And if you're going to continue working, you have to be able to afford your bills. I think it's a balance, right? I mean, there are going to be those customers who can come in and pay you $5,000. There are going to be the customers who need it for free because they just don't have any money. I think it comes down to understanding the difference between the two. But ultimately, your time is what you deem the value of it to be. So if your time at that point is $250 an hour, $1,000 an hour, whatever, I think you should charge it. And if the customer pays it, there's no complaint.
Changing gears, what would you say are some of the most common, frequent mistakes that you see people make over and over and over again, either in learning electrical or in their application of it in the field? What are just some common things that people it drives you crazy because you're like, everybody makes this mistake?
Yeah. Well, there's several, I guess. In the classroom, is self-confidence and coming in defeated before you even start.
Oh,
People are convinced that they can't do it, and I don't know why I'm here. And I mean, I've had some strange experiences with people calling their boss and saying, he's talking over their heads and whatever, and nobody understands him. I'm like, your boss took the class 3 months ago, so I'm not sure what the problem was. And some people just don't want to do it. But most guys lack the sort of security and confidence that you have to have in order to kind of make progress because they just have already convinced themselves that they can't do it. So the first thing is self-confidence. I think the second thing is overthinking it and not understanding the simplicity of what's really there. It's one wire that sends 12 volts to a thing, or it's one wire that sends a ground to a pin. It's really that's 98% of every system out there. There's an input and there's an output, or there's just a straight circuit. They don't change. It's the same one yesterday that you worked on tomorrow, today, the same. They're all the same. So, people tend to ignore the fact that it's the same thing over and over again, so they don't apply the idea of the experience that they had. They don't apply the experience from the previous day. They're starting new. They're starting completely new, which, as you know, is a mistake because it really is the same thing. I mean, how many times have you said, oh, same old thing, oh, same old thing?
Oh, every time.
Here it is again, right? So it's a matter of just knowing that and believing it, I think. So believing that it's something simple and believing that you can find it is probably the second thing. The third thing would be misusing the tools and misunderstanding the readings.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So,
Totally.
and I teach this in class. Everybody assumes continuity means ohm meter. Well, the word continuity just means not broken. We live on the North American continent. It's a unbroken landmass. So the word continuity just means not broken. Well, any test that confirms continuity is a continuity test. So if I gave you a piece of wire, you pulled out your knife and stripped off the insulation and went, well, it ain't broken. Well, that's a continuity test.
Totally.
It's dumb, but it's still a continuity test. Well, that's what people don't understand. If I see voltage 47 feet out on a boom at the end of a wire, that's a continuity test.
Absolutely.
The wire's not broken.
Yeah.
It also isn't shorted, because if it was shorted, I'd read something different. The fourth one, Matt, I'm going to be very honest with you, it's a little vague, but we shouldn't ask what's wrong. Mechanics ask what's wrong. Electricians ask what's right. Because if it's one tiny little sliver of something doing something in one circuit, then what does that mean about the other 99.9% of the system? It's working. Well, I can identify what something is doing correctly far easier than I can identify what it's not doing. So knowing how it's supposed to work, schematic, and understanding what the system is supposed to do, schematic, and being able to say, that light's on, that light's off, so whatever makes them both work, that part of it ain't broke, it's over here. And being able to use that common sense in order to understand that if we can rule out everything that's working right, then we will eventually zero in on the thing that's wrong. Right?
Yeah.
And understanding that electrical is not mechanical. It's different. It's a completely different animal. If you try to tackle an electrical problem with a mechanical point of view, you're probably going to fail. But if you attack it with an electrical point of view, as you've clearly indicated that you've come to be competent at, then taking an electrical point of view means that you're going to have the right mindset, the right frame of reference. So I guess in simple terms, that's probably there's probably 1,000 more, but those 5 I think we'll have to do.
Yeah.
So,
I'm trying to think of all the times that I've had critical comments when I'm doing a ohms test on, which isn't that often, by the way, and I'll mention, well, I'm going to do a continuity test, and the comments go, you're not doing a continuity test, you're doing a resistance test, you're doing an ohms test, and it's like, no, it's a continuity test. And why would you even argue that? I don't know. I think the guy's name was Ben Franklin. I don't remember, but
it was a dork.
Yeah, yeah. And then also for what it's worth, just something that I can kind of share on my journey through this. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made that really inhibited me was my apprehension at adapting some of the more complex tools. I used to watch other videos, and as soon as they pulled out that oscilloscope, I was thrilled because it meant I don't have to watch the video anymore because I'm never going to use an oscilloscope ever in my life. Right. So I don't have to watch this. Yeah. And what I discovered, the biggest mistake I made, is thinking that tools like an oscilloscope are only for people who are really good at electrical. It turned out it's the exact opposite. I became really good at electrical when I started using a scope. There was actually a viewer of mine, believe it or not, Robert Roble, he goes by C5 Diag, that sent me an oscilloscope. It changed everything because now I have to use it. Once I started using it, that's when I really learned electrical. Right. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that not only I make, but I know I hear again and again and again. I'm not watching this channel anymore. You're using an oscilloscope. That's for a professional. I'm going to make the exact opposite argument that if you want to learn this, you need the oscilloscope. And also, I can't count how many diagnoses I've done. You cannot do it without an oscilloscope. You want to diagnose a CAN system without an oscilloscope? Good luck.
Right. Well, you know what's interesting about that, and I don't use them frequently because my class is geared towards other topics, but I have used them. But what's intriguing to me about it is they're voltmeters.
Yes, they are. They're voltmeters. That's it.
Yeah, it's just voltage over time.
Exactly.
All you're doing is you're measuring voltage over time.
Exactly.
And when a system is supposed to give a pulse signal with a predictable frequency or a predictable cycle, then what you're looking for is some change, right? So if you see an O-scope trace that's normal, then that's the what's right question. Well, that trace is normal until it isn't, right? And then the question is, oh, we had it drop out over here. Why did it do that? So the thing that I think is the most misleading is people don't understand that you're just either reading volts or amps depending upon how you have your input set up. So, it's really no different than a standard digital voltmeter except in the way the information is being presented.
Absolutely true.
Right? So to be afraid of an oscilloscope, is understandable on some levels, but if you just analyze it for what it is, you go, well, hey, I'm just reading voltage.
Yeah.
But people get confused because they don't know how to set it, they don't know how to set the timing on it, they don't know how to set the parameters on it. So that's the confusing part, but the seeing 12 volts, that's easy. Yeah. Just getting to the point where you see it the way you want to see it.
Well, another thing I can actually add, which is pretty unusual for me, is the ability to going back to making money on this. I have found that oscilloscope is a tremendous revenue generator. And here's a perfect example of it. Sometimes I'll have people that they want to do a compression test on their car, but they don't feel comfortable doing it because they've got that intake manifold that covers one bank of the engine. And they don't, they feel comfortable pulling plugs and doing a compression test, but they don't want to mess with that intake manifold. Right. So they'll ask, can I do the compression test? And I can come up with an agreement to them, well, how long do you think that'll take? They're thinking it's going to take 4 hours to do it. And I'm like, I'll tell you what, I'll cut the price in half. I will do that compression test for you for 2-hour fee. And they will say, dude, done, deal. And I use my oscilloscope and I do that compression test in basically 5 minutes. Honestly, 5 minutes. Yeah. if that isn't a revenue generation technique, I don't know what is.
Well, that's the right tool and starting in the right place. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's the fast mechanic argument. So I would never disagree.
Exactly. That's the fast mechanic right there. And that's a fast mechanic to the highest degree.
Yeah, sure.
And now I've made $200 for 5 minutes. And on top of that, the customer is thrilled.
Yeah.
And how did I do it? You know?
No, I would never argue that you should do something the hard way if there's an easier way to do it.
Totally.
You know,
unless you learn, like I used to purposely, and I'll still do it on this channel. My viewers know this. I will very often do things the hard way because there's an educational value to them.
Yeah,
but in real life, hell no.
Well, this Jack Richards fellow, who is 85 years old, worked on canvas-covered airplanes at Midway Field in 1928. He also said, if you want to find the easiest way to do something, find the laziest guy in the shop who still gets a paycheck. And he's right. There are people who are really smart and really competent, really capable, and really quick. And if they're still getting paid, they're obviously producing. But who cares if you're lazy if you're producing? I mean, by his definition, lazy is fast. But still, I mean, that's what it's all about. And the only thing I would argue is that it's harder to get there electrically if you short circuit the diagnosis. Because you don't learn during the repair, because replacing a butt splice teaches you nothing.
Right. Well, that's actually all the material and questions that I had to cover. But guys, make sure you get your copy of the book, Fundamental Electrical Troubleshooting, Daniel Sullivan. And if you haven't learned by now, this is one of the best tools that you can own, not just for application, but learning.
It does one thing well. It's not magic. It just does a voltage drop. And it lets you know if you got corrosion. So
I think it's the easiest way to do it. Because it's real. I see it as two tools in one, because you also have your regular DVOM too.
Yeah, just read voltage, push button.
And if you have a shop or anything and people want you to maybe do a training for them, they can contact you, and that's what you do. You fly all over the place and do trainings and everything. And I really appreciate having the opportunity for you to come here. So thank you. And we'll work with more with Dan in the future for sure, and do some projects together. But really, really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Happy to be here. Love Colorado.